I was the
Good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, pass it along. What about this?
Panel, which is usually about women's leadership. This time we just thought let's expand the topic a little more. It's about the shifting dynamics of leadership, about gender diversity overall. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Lakshmi Ramarajan. She, in fact, her research here, she's part of the organizational behavior unit here, and her research examines management and consequences of identities in organizations. So she's the perfect person to be discussing leadership and social identities like gender, culture, race, and so on, and diversity in leadership. So I'll hand it over to her to introduce our speakers and start the day.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We are very, very excited to have this distinguished panel in front of us. I'm not going to take a lot of time doing introductions. I'm just going to give the one-sentence version on each of them. I had a little bit of time before we started to get a good sense of some of the things they'll be talking about, so I want to make sure we have enough time for them and then enough time for you to ask questions. And also, I think this is a nice symbolic event on International Women's Day to have this distinguished panel in front of us. So Dipali Goenka is a managing director at Wellspun Global Brands Limited. She actually was a founder and established a world-class design studio at Wellspun and led it as an award-winning design team, successful retail initiative in India. And since 2010, she's in a much larger role with the Wellspun Group, and she has been talking to me about this transition that she's making from India to the US and the factory floor to global customers. So I think she'll have a lot of interesting things to say. Renana Javvala is a president of SEVA. For those of you who don't know, SEVA is a very well-known and well-respected organization around women's employment, especially from a trade union and labor perspective. And she's been working with SEVA for over 30 years. And has received one of the highest awards and honors that India can give, the Padma Shri Award. Thank you very much for being here. Zenobia Muchala is the co-founder of Care.com, vice president and general manager of international and payments at Care, and is responsible for the company's global footprint. So again, like Dipali has a lot to offer and to talk about with this move towards being a global organization and women's leadership role in that perspective. Amita Soni is the Chief Marketing Officer at Chief Outsiders and has a lot of experience in real estate, portfolio management, and sustainability solutions. She's a co-founder of a health and fitness app company and has founded many other organizations, including Anza Auto ID Group, and Altec Consulting. So a lot of entrepreneurial experience and spirit here for us to learn from. And lastly, Punita Kumar Sinha, the founder of Pacific Paradigm Investors. A lot of financial experience and comes from Blackstone Asia Advisors as the Chief Investment Officer and the Senior PM for IFM, the largest India fund in the US, for over 15 years. So a lot of diversity in terms of global and local experience, women in all sorts of sectors, and all sorts of issues, hopefully, that we're going to dive into today about the challenges and the opportunities for women's leadership in this current world. So I'd like to start with a very broad question, and this was something that as they were setting up the panel, this question of multiple kinds of diversity kept coming up. So South Asia is a region where multiple kinds of diversity are a common everyday experience for most of us. And so one of our biggest questions was, what kinds of diversity are really salient to you in your leadership experiences? And how does that help or undermine the work that you're doing in your organizations?
I think for me, interestingly, for us at Wellspun, there are a couple of things that we saw. Our business has an expanse across USA, Europe, and India. So the diversity happened in the terms of ethnicity, terms of the gender, everything, because we had a team with a very different culture in USA and in UK and in India, where the people were from the factory. So the cultures are very different. So to get them together to speak and connect was very, very important. So we actually created a corporate university within an organization so that they could train in in the cultures, in communication. So that was a very important aspect, Lakshmi. Apart from that, the other thing was we had women around Anjar in these communities. So either getting the work to them or skilling them up to get to our factory floor has been a very interesting working aspect that we worked on in Southeast Asia.
I can add something. Diversity has been actually something that's been very important for Care.com from the time we started. I think we were co-founded in 2006, and it was 3 women and 1 man. And our CEO, Sheila, is a Filipino American. You have me, I'm Indian. Dana is African American. And then we would always joke that Dave was like our token white guy. And I think a lot of the premise behind starting Care was around solving an issue that's fundamentally faced by women, which is, how do you make sure that the people you love are cared for when you go off and, pursue a career, if that's what you're choosing to do, or even if that's not, it's just a fundamental need, and women are the ones who are the decision makers. And we kind of mind a lot of that diversity and have always tried to keep that a part of the culture of the company in terms of being able to talk about, what are our different, whether it's a lot of young people, which startups tend to have, or how do you balance that with parents who have schedules where you do have to go home at certain times. And, creating kind of areas where we can discuss differences and conflict, but then still be productive.
I was going to talk about a different type of diversity because Seva, as you know, works on the ground with poor women. And to give an example, Seva Bank, it works in Ahmedabad city, and our members are based in different colonies or areas. And the diversity is this, that some are Muslim, some are Hindu, some are Dalit, some are backward caste, and they usually keep to themselves. They don't, especially the Hindu and Muslim communities, don't interact with each other. But when they become part of the bank, then the leaders in that area have to go to women in each community. And that brings different communities together, different types of women together. And we see this as a way in which we are not only working with a diverse, so that you get savings from everybody there, but also a way of integration within the city.
Just wanted to add an example about my last company, where as part of the executive team, this was a late-stage VC-backed company, a technology company. And as part of the executive team, there was a lot of diversity of experiences, whether diversity in terms of the work experiences, gender, race, sexual orientation, whatever, But I think what really made it work for us was a common goal and commonality in thinking in terms of where we wanted to get. This was not a really early stage startup, but still at the point where we wanted to grow successfully, both in terms of revenues and profits, and have a successful exit. So doing that and figuring out how each one of us, both from a functional area and from an executive management perspective, could make it work was a big plus. And certainly all of us, and it wasn't even very overtly, but we certainly had different experiences which we brought to the fore in terms of making this work. And not everything worked all the time. There were certainly instances where it didn't work, but we could all get together and share our experiences, and ultimate result worked out very well. We did have a very successful exit, so that was good.
So, I managed investment funds across Asia. So the clients and investors were US, but we invested in Asia. So the companies we invested in were, managed by Asians, Indians, Chinese, and the talent that we have in terms of analyzing those investments were both here in the US as well as in Hong Kong, Mumbai, and various parts of the world. So it was an interesting experience to be able to connect all of these people together and run a successful investment firm. And I think I learned quite a bit of lessons along the way, which we'll come to later on. But it was interesting. I had probably, there are very few Indian women in investment management in India, and I think I probably had the only woman at that point on my team. And similarly, of course, in Asia and China, there are quite a few more. But my team had probably more women. There were 3 women out of 20, so that's still quite a large number compared to what we saw in other investment organizations.
It's all relative in some respects, right? So one of the things that seems to come out, and thank you for at least providing the common platform for the kinds of diversity you guys have been confronting, but you alluded to failure, you alluded to lessons. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of key challenges or key ways you've managed the challenges that some of this diversity has presented to you. So for example, when you were talking about the Seva example, how is it, who are these leaders and how is it that they can bridge divides that seem really deep-rooted in some respects? Or how is it that you get people on a factory floor to talk to or think about, products from a global perspective? So what are the challenges, the specific challenges, and if you have stories or examples, that would be great about how you overcame them.
You want me to start? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want the big one?
I could do with the small or the big. Well, the example that I gave of Ahmedabad, our bank in Ahmedabad. So I'm thinking of one of our leaders who is on the board of the bank, and her name is Lakshmi Ben, and she is a head loader. So she works in the market, cloth market, and she got very interested in savings and helping other women to save. So she was a natural leader. And within her cloth market, she began collecting savings. And she would sit in one spot, and women would come and give her the savings. And then they began getting loans. And so right next door, right in the next block, there were a lot of women living who did stitching and who were Muslim women. And they would come to the cloth market and they'd see this woman sitting there, and they'd come to her and they'd say, will you collect our savings also? We are not part of your community, but we'd like to save. And then she began going and sitting there in their community and collecting their savings. And this way she joined 4 different communities of 4 different castes. And then they all elected her together to the board. So she was able to do that. But her real challenge was that when she started going to the Muslim area, a lot of people, especially her family, said, please don't go there, it's very dangerous for you. And especially we had a number of riots, and she still kept going. I think a number of times her family forcibly locked her in the house and said, you can't go. So she had to keep overcoming the challenges within the family.
An interesting example that I have, which I would like to share with you, is about a girl called Avni. She worked on our shop floor at the factory. She was out of 6 children, 6 daughters, and had a father who basically wanted a male in the family. But I must say, we did a multi-skilling program with Walmart on our shop floor. And she was out of, I think, 1,000 vendors that Walmart had across the world. She was chosen to, talk about herself and her life in Arkansas, Bentonville. And she was sponsored. Her visa was done by Walmart. And imagine, from Anjar to Arkansas has been a long journey for her. And she's become a heroine at our factory. There's so many girls who want to come and, be and aspire and want to be like her. So I think these are the kind of small little examples that we've created that just go beyond everything.
Anybody else feeling motivated to jump in? So one of the questions that comes to mind then is, how do you create the organizational supports to make those kinds of examples happen, right? So when you're confronted with constant pushback or something that is out of people's experience and imagination, how do you as leaders create the organizational systems or supports? You know, Zenobia, you were alluding to create a space where the tensions can be managed. I mean, it's a word, it's a set of words we use all the time, but what does that space look like in reality on the ground, and how do you create it as a leader in an organization?
I think there are a couple of ways that we've done it at CARE. One is sort of on a broad organizational level. Every time we've, you know, as we've heard that there are issues that people are starting to hit in terms of the culture, we've done a round of focus groups across all of our companies. So now we are in 4 locations. We're in Waltham, Berlin, Austin, and Mountain View, and we specifically designed these groups. So in the instance I talked about, where you have a nice mix of really young people, they want to work long hours, they want to go out, you know, after work for drinks, but you're balancing that with a lot of parents who are, you know, who have commitments at home and they want a very structured day. And it was starting to create some cultural tension as we were scaling and growing the company. And what we ended up doing was designing each group to be about 10 people and a balance between, you know, parents and non-parents. And we just asked questions like, you know, what is, you know, how do you deal with the other side of the equation when you want to have your 6 o'clock meeting and somebody had to go home and you're really irritated about it? Like, what is, you know, what do you do? How do you manage that? How do you respect other people's time, their ambition, where they are in their life? And those they're not like intensely resolution oriented, but just hearing what somebody else is going through opens up people's mind to thinking about it doesn't have to be one particular way. That's been, I think, super useful, especially because the company's grown. You know, over the last 8 years, we've gone from, you know, the 4 of us to, it's now, I think, running around 500 people. So, you know, how do you maintain that culture of communication and diversity if you don't do those kinds of things? And then I think at the leadership level, too, we end up spending a lot of time, you know, within each business unit. I just took on the international business unit, so we have a division in Berlin last summer. And you know what we've done is it's actually split between Waltham and Berlin. So the tech and product team is in Waltham, the marketing and business teams tend to be in Berlin, and we do a lot of, you know, at least 3 or 4 times a year, we'll all get in the same room and debate, do we have the right vision? Are we driving the right goals? How do we talk to each other productively? What are our personality types? The team is a nice mix of thinkers and feelers, and both bring very different opinions and styles to how they talk to each other. And we share what, you know, sets us off, what keeps us going, and in that way, we know how to have conflict in a productive way with each other.
So a slightly different example. It's, you know, when I hired on my team both Chinese and Indian people, because we were investing in Asia, and Americans. And it was very interesting how people's educational background and cultural background create their work ethics. So for instance, if I gave some, you know, research to be done to both the Indian and the Chinese, and I don't want to stereotype, I found that I had to adapt my own leadership pattern to suit, you know, to get better work, better quality work from them. In that, you know, if you gave work to the Indian analyst, they were much more aggressive, assertive, take, in fact, initiative and argue with you. You gave work to the Chinese person, they would do the work really well, diligently, but they wouldn't like take the initiative and go the next step. So there was always this constant in my own mind, like, how do I change my leadership style to work the different cultures and people from different cultures? Because when you're talking to one set of people, you have to talk in a certain way. When you talk to another set of people, you have to talk in a different way. And you learn that over time. And how do you get the teams to work well together? Because you're investing as a team, and you're investing across sectors, across Asia. And there are different styles of how people will actually deliver the output. So that's sort of a interesting challenge that you know, one faces when you run investment teams across the world, and your investors are here. Also, you know, when investors want to speak to experts say in a sector, and they want and the person happens to be a Chinese who doesn't speak great English, then they want to hear from, they will keep looking at the white American guy to answer their question, and then I have to continuously get the Chinese lady to speak up, and then they would still look at the American guy to like summarize it basically. So you have to learn to deal with all of these different interesting ways, and I found that getting people together over conference calls regularly, over video conference, and then learning from each other, watching and observing how different styles are being used in different countries, I think sensitized everybody, and over a long period of time after working together, I think everybody started being on the same page.
I'll add something more in terms of going to market. We were expanding to the UK, and the initial thought was, hey, speaking English and everything, it'll be the much easier market to expand to in terms of going outside the US or Northern America. But very different culturally in terms of how they would approach things. And when I would go across, I was in charge of opening up the market. People were very nice in terms of taking the time to talk to me, give their time, much more so than here in the US. But things just move at a different pace. There are all these niceties, whether in person or over the phone. And I mean, they all think that Americans are just way too aggressive. I mean, I don't know, women or men or whatever. They just think you're just very, to the point. And sometimes we'd be saying, even if it was con calls, the rest of us here would be rolling our eyes because they'd be talking about all the bank holidays and all the other things at the end of it. Say, when do they actually do work? But that's just saying it was for us as a company to really understand the cultural nuances or differences, and they're very good at what they do. It's just a very different way of doing things. So.
Actually, if I could, one other thing that I think through my experience of working across different cultures is, certain things are okay in one culture and not in another culture. And what was challenging for
Can you give us the most salient example?
Yeah. So, for instance, in India, people work relationships are very, tend to get family-like. People want to get involved in each other's family life. So, if somebody is pregnant, everybody will talk about it openly. They'll want to know how the progress is, how is everything going. Whereas in the US, and if your employee is pregnant, you dare not say a word, right? You can't say anything. You can't even ask about their health. They're going to a doctor's appointment, and you're advised not to say anything and ask them how they are. So that's, when you have people from different cultures, like, the Indian analyst will call up and find out that, somebody in the US is pregnant, and they'll want to immediately know, how are you doing? How's your health? When are you due? And then we have to constantly coach them, like, no, you're not supposed to discuss this with the American analysts. So, family relationships are very important when you work in certain cultures, whereas in other cultures, you're supposed to be, very much more private. Another example is, if someone's family member, like a father or somebody, dies in India and you're there, every employee will just drop work and go to the cremation. Or in the US, nobody really typically does that. So the expectations and how to manage different expectations of different people working together can be quite interesting.
I would just like to add on a very interesting example. You're talking about different countries and different culture. I'll talk about my own company. And when I came on board in textiles, I think people you would know, around here would know that, in textiles there are very few women. And me coming on board was a very different thing altogether. Today, when I came on board, it was like the man and the machines. And the thing that, interestingly, when I got on board, the things that I got on board was the softer skills. It was not just a commodity product or about finance, but about, a product which could be innovative, which could have a consumer perspective. So that actually really made that difference. Along with that, on the textile floor, on the shop floor at the factories, you would have more of men, and just around today also, only 2% on the floor of textiles is women. Now at Welspun, it is more than 14%, and we're continuing to work on the averages as well. So the challenges do happen. I think it happens in the diversity across the countries, but also within your own organizations.
Right. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Not particularly. So one of the challenges, I think, or one of the themes that seems to be coming up as you're all talking is this notion of the adaptability, right? That in different contexts or to different audiences, you are presenting, either you yourselves as women leaders, or even in your example, the women themselves that you're either helping or benefiting or are doing the same thing, that they're working across these divides. So what kind of a challenge does that present, either for yourselves or for the employees or the workers that you work with? Because there's certainly a narrative in this country around authenticity, right? And that leadership is about authenticity. And yet there's this constant notion that you're going to adapt to different audiences, speak a slightly different language, or present a slightly different persona to the different people based on their needs. So does this present a challenge to you? If so, how? And if not, why not?
Authenticity it's not the same thing in terms of, you're not saying if you're being authentic, you can't be honest or transparent. You're just being sensitive to the fact that people want sometimes the same information presented in different ways. And it's actually more than the leadership, it's actually something you want the rest of the organization mirroring as well. And I think it all boils down to ultimately communications and transparency, whether internally within an organization, within your own groups, or your customers or vendors and partners as well.
No, I think that's exactly what I faced, is that, you have to keep adapting to the different cultures. And it becomes even more challenging if you're a woman, like all of us are of Indian origin in the US, that when you go to Asia, you could be very American here, and you're expected to be very American here. But when you go to Asia, no matter how many years you've lived in the US and how American you are, they expect you to be Indian, because they're like, you look Indian, you've got to behave like the rest of us. And so you have that additional challenge to deal with, that when you go to Asia or to other countries, you're not really seen as an American woman, you're seen as an Indian woman. And I'm sure that applies to men as well. But what I think is that for men, it's a little easier because all cultures really generally have the same expectations of men, but they have very different expectations from women, and that includes women leaders. So that's something I think will take time. There's no easy answer. And in fact, the first example I have of that is when I started working here and I first had to go to India on work. The question was, what are you going to wear? Are you going to wear Indian clothes when you go for meetings there, or are you going to wear Western clothes? And that was something that was on my mind for a long time, and then finally my boss in the US said, hey, you work for an American company, you're representing an American company, you're going to wear the clothes you wear here. And when you wear those clothes in India, and I walked on my skirts and my jackets in the 90s, everybody's like, okay, what is this Indian woman wearing these Western clothes walking around? People in Delhi in particular would stare at you when you walked out even to get into the car. So it's as basic as how you dress.
Does that resonate for anybody else?
There's an interesting example which actually, in the sense of, I would not talk about any terms of authenticity, but something which I just want to quote an example. I think being a woman actually today in this world is kind of an advantage which I see is very important, because you have companies like Boeing, Exxon, Walmart. They have looked at women-held enterprises in a very, very big way. And I must say, and I'm very proud to say, that every package that is shipped out to Walmart today, or will be shipped to Sam's, will have a women-held logo from India. So I think the diversity does, it does work differently, but it also can work in a way that could be advantageous as well.
Yeah. I actually had a different take on adaptability. And just going back to that same example that I was giving of Lakshmi Ben, who is a board member and who collects savings and gives loans. Now, when she became board member, she suddenly was in a different role. So she had to look at the bank as a whole and the interest of the bank. So that was her one role. And then she had to look at the interest of all the women who she was representing, and that was her other role. And for a woman who was uneducated, And nobody ever expected anything that she would be more than carrying cloth on her head all her life. And then she was able to think about the interest of the bank and the interest of the women. And I remember a very interesting conversation we had in the board, that should we increase the interest rates of loans, because the interest rates of loans were increasing all around. So should we increase the interest rate, which would benefit the bank, or should we keep the interest rate low, which would benefit the women? And it was really interesting to see these women who were uneducated talk about balancing the interest of their members and who they were representing, and the interest of the bank as a whole. And they came to a very wise decision.
That's interesting. That's such a fascinating example.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something about the comment about working in Asia. So when I first started working out of business school, I was a program manager for a semiconductor capital equipment company. And I was managing a program which was developed with our joint venture partner in Japan, and had to spend like a month at a time in Japan, but also work not only with the joint venture president, but also our top customers like at Hitachi and NEC and Fujitsu and all. So initially there was some concern, like, to your point, how are they going to react, to not only an American woman, but an Indian American woman at that, and someone who hadn't been here for quite that many years. But ultimately it boiled down to, I was the only one within the organization who knew anything about that product or program. So everyone, it went off beautifully.
Make yourself indispensable.
That's exactly it. It worked beautifully. And really, I had wonderful business relationships from like all those years, and it just worked.
So you alluded a little earlier to lessons. I'm going to try and combine that a little bit in the last 5 minutes before we turn it over to the audience for their questions. Could you give sort of a brief overview of what motivated you in your journey towards leadership? What was it? Was gender part of the mission? Was it something that came up along the way? What was the motivation for you as a leader, and especially as a Indian women leader, as we're talking about right now, on your journey? And then what might be one critical lesson that you think the audience should really know from that experience? And then I'm going to add, so that was the past, what motivated you, the present, the lesson for them, and the future piece I'm going to ask, what do you think is the critical thing that this generation needs to do? What's your vision for them? And then we'll turn it over to these guys. The quick version.
You want to start?
Sure. I think for me, one of the turning points early on in my career, so when I graduated from my master's, I went to work for a financial software company, and I kind of fell in love with the startup world. My dad was an entrepreneur, so it just really fit with me. But it was really my second job that kind of defined what I wanted to do within that world. I worked at a company called Upromise. Their mission was to help families save money for college. And they were really trying to target people as soon as they had a baby, to say, the time to start saving for college is right now, not when your kid is a teenager. And it was my first experience at a mission-driven for-profit business. And that was a very, I think, powerful motivation, and very much defined, kind of the team we all met at Upromise. After Upromise got acquired by Sallie Mae, that was where we started talking about starting Care.com, and it was solving another problem that families face, which is, access to high quality and really great care. It's a global issue. It's a little bit different in every culture, but every culture deals with it in some way, shape, or form. And again, it's one that particularly affects women because, even if you have the dialogue that it's shared housework, which you certainly somehow seem to do in this country, women are the decision makers. They're the ones who pick the babysitter. And so I think part of what has always motivated me and the team at CARE has been, let's go solve a problem that faces family, be a part of a mission-driven business, but have it be a business. We're run very much as a business. We care about our growth and our profits and our bottom line. I think when I look down, I don't know what's next. I've been at CARE for 8 years, and it doesn't even feel like the story's half written yet. But, you know, I can always see that sort of balance holding true. What do I want for the next generation? Wow, that's a tough one.
Maybe we could pass it along and you guys
Yeah,
can
right.
Okay, since it's in my hand. You know, what motivated, again, it's not for me, it's not about me, but I moved to another example, and I'm thinking about a producer company that we formed in Delhi, which is of embroidery and zari workers. And they formed this producer company to directly link with the big retailers. And there's this woman who is an emerging leader in a way, and her name is Nazma. And she comes from a very conservative family, and she first came to the producer company basically because she needed the work. And I believe, and I've seen, that many women, and men I suppose also, but many women have this fire inside them to do something different, to be a leader, to help others. And she slowly developed into a leader, bringing other women, controlling quality, improving herself, and sort of teaching the other women how to maintain quality. She faced a lot of challenges because she'd never moved. I mean, the first example I gave you was of a woman who was in the market anyway. She had never moved out of her house. And her going to the production center, then her going to other people's houses, there were a lot of allegations against, you know, in many of the communities where we work, when women move out, there's the allegation immediately as if she's going for some sexual purpose. And that's the worst possible thing she could do. So they really demean what she's doing. How did she overcome that? Because other people, women started supporting her, and because she was earning more money. So, yeah. Which way?
I'll actually talk about my journey, which started, I got married at the age of 18 in a conservative Marwari community, and was a homemaker, and started working 15 years back. And when I started my own retail operations, it was pretty good because it was my hands-on startup. But when I got on the helm of affairs of textiles, that's where it was basically I had to establish my credibility as kind of the leader, and that actually came into play, and where I think the softer skills, managing people, I think the empathy and the inclusive way of leadership got me working, and that actually, I mean, today I'm proud to say that Welspun India has a growth, year-on-year growth of around 20% for the past 5 years. And but as I go forward, I think the critical thing for me at Welspun would be to see and empowering more and more women across the communities would be very, very important. And taking that forward, I think we are a young company, a young country. So getting them on, training them, multi-skilling them, and showing them a path would be very, very important. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I won't talk about what motivated me because that's a different topic, I think, altogether. But I think what I would like to the next generation, or the generation here sitting in front, to sort of think about is, leadership is very much a cultural. It's a cultural context that defines leadership. So whether it's political leaders, whether it's business leaders, the same leadership style that's effective in one culture is probably not effective necessarily in another culture. And so you have to almost pick the culture that you want to play in. While analytical skills are mobile across cultures, leadership actually is much more of an interpersonal skill. So, I mean, to give you a very simple example here, that if you are a woman, and this is particularly true for women, if you are a woman who wants to be a professional woman and kind of be in a leadership position down the road, if you are in a country or a culture that's like in India, for instance, there, if you notice, a lot of the women who have risen to the top have a personality style that is more conforming, more accepted, more non-threatening, not as outspoken. And it's because in those cultures, tenure-based sort of tracks are more common. So for instance, whether the Indian Administrative Service, you look at how many women have reached to Secretary Government of India, which is the top, as high as you can go. And that's because, you know, it's basically just being conforming, doing a great job, and, you know, basically as very much a tenure-based track. And it's similar for organizations in India. If you look at a lot of the women leaders in financial services, they've all risen. They've joined the same organization 30 years ago, and now today they are the CEO. And the reason they are the CEO is partly because all the men over time have, you know, there's been much more turnover and the women have stayed on, and also because they've been non-threatening. Whereas if you want to be a leader in, say, a country like the US, as a woman, you've got to operate differently. You've got to be much more outspoken. You've got to be noticed. You've got to network. You've got to stand out, and you know, you basically have to lean in. Whereas in, you know, India, you have to lean back. So you have to almost decide what your cultural context is.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because I see a lot of head nodding here, and I like controversy on panels. So I'm going to give it to Dipali just to. I think some of this conversation is exactly what we want.
You know, I basically, to a certain extent, don't agree to that, because I think in the situations that we are, I think we make the most of the situation, and I think I've seen that in the corridors in the government, you know, as well. When you go for meetings, I mean, I think make the most of the situation. I mean, if women are, if women can be looked as the weaker sex. Take that advantage and be the first one to get in, you know, and have the face of, you know, in the meeting. I think so. For me and for us, and I think in the Indian perspective and the Indian context, the times are changing. Women are getting into the position where they would be in the leadership position, and I basically say that if that situation is, make the most of it and take the advantage of it. Believe me, it works to all the advantage. And I have seen that in the terms of even being a part of, you know, the customers I work with, maybe a Walmart or a Target. Today I'm called on the forums and invited on the Home Council, maybe because I'm a woman, or maybe I think differently than the other vendor partners that are around.
You wanted to jump in.
Yeah. Well, actually, I didn't have a comment necessarily regarding the Indian perspective, but I just wanted to share that for me, in terms of my personal journey as a leader, and I've worked at large MNCs and a lot of younger technology startups, but I think I have evolved more in terms of my personal thinking as a leader. And what's worked for me is empathizing much more with the people I manage. And when I say empathizing, really trying to understand where they are trying to go and how I can help them, how I can coach them. And it may not even be within the organization where we are both working at the same time, but just how can I help them in life and in their careers in general, and it's worked very well.
Thank you. So I want to turn it over to you. One of the interesting pieces, and I think this will stay with me for a bit, is the notion of, you know, leadership as this challenge or transformation of the status quo versus leadership as a position. That's something that's attained, right? And I think, you know, my way of understanding what you both are talking about is this sense that to what extent can you take on a role of, you know, take on an attitude that's about transforming the status quo, whether or not you have the positional authority to do so. And, you know, certainly some of the examples you guys were talking about are very, capture that dynamic a lot. So I want to turn it over to the audience. Questions over here? Just one second. Give people some time to raise their hands. All right, I'm going to start over here.
Mine is a two-point question. One is that as a woman leader, there are times, as being a leader, it's not a linear track. So there's times where there's serious discouragement and factors that we have to deal with as women, external to what is it takes to become a leader, right? So like the women aspect. So like, what have personally you've done to rebound from that, the discouragement, and continue on to become who you are today? That's question number one. And question number two was that as many of us in this room are the next generation of women leaders, what is like a key point of advice that you can give to us that to, I guess, as a guideline, that would be the best way. Thank you.
I'd like to take this.
I can take a stab. Oh, did you want to take
No, why don't you take this?
I think my answer to both questions is a little bit similar, and it just boils down to this: don't feel guilty, because you will always have signals. I mean, I think growing up, definitely one of the stories that I grew up with was that, you would get married at the right age and have kids at the right age and do it in a certain way. And, my parents were very encouraging of all of us. I have two sisters having careers, and they wanted that for us. So I kind of heard both stories. And, along the way, I think maybe it's because I'm the youngest child, and my oldest sister always said to me, you were always the least guilty because you always got your way. But really, I think one of the things I had to tell myself, and I have through the choices I've had to make in my life, say, I can't be guilty about, not doing X because that was expected of me, because I'm opening my eyes and making a choice not to do it. And then moving on. And I kind of talk to women on my team, and I see them going through some of those decisions. Do I stop working when I have a child? Do I keep working? How do I have these conversations? And there aren't any right or wrong answers, but sometimes you make your decision and then you enjoy it and embrace it, and whether that's the one to stay at work or stay at home, I think not having the guilt makes it much more your choice.
For me, I want to give you two examples. I'll give you an example. When you talked about the first one,
Just because of time.
Oh, sorry.
I want to get to another question too.
So, I think, your second question then about being, what are you thinking, what could be the example for you people as you go forward? I think we as women are unique, and be proud of it, because I have seen the advantage and I work that around, and I think we all will. Because the ability to multitask, the ability to empathize, the ability to empower the other people, I think that's a very unique selling proposition that we all have as women. And it has led me to a long journey, and I think it will to all of us here too.
Any other key lessons?
I think
You guys are very interesting. I don't know why. I feel like you have something very interesting.
Exactly. No, I just wanted to make sure.
so. I think as a woman, not all organizations will necessarily be right for you. So what's right for others may not be necessarily right for you. So if you are, as you said, if you need to rebound, you probably need to think about looking at another organization. It's important to actually have very supportive bosses. And I have found typically that bosses who've had very strong working wives or daughters, successful daughters, are the ones that tend to be very good to women employees. So just choose the right environment. And if one environment you're not doing well, doesn't mean that you won't do well at another one.
Just want to add to that one. Sorry, real quick.
These are good lessons.
It's just that it's good idea. As Punita said, if one organization's not right, you can move on. Except I wouldn't say the first time it happens, you don't say immediately that I'm going to move on. It could be any, it could be any business situation, any sales situation where, you got to take a lot of rejection before you actually close on deals. So give it a few tries. Don't just,
So fail, learn, and then move on. Right?
If need be.
All right, 2 questions, one here and one there, and then we'll wrap up. Can we be quick, just for time?
We talk a lot about what women leaders face, what are the different kind of challenges, but to put a positive and optimistic side of it, what are the things which support you to exceed as a leader and gain respect from a genuinely male dominated working environment?
Thank you. How do you get support to make the changes and the transformations that you make?
I can do one thing. I just I think the thing that I've noticed always is if you're doing it right, if you're really focused on the job, on the work that you're supposed to do, then you really gain a lot of respect. So I find that sort of the key thing that makes people respect and trust.
Anyone else?
I think just being really good at what you do. So go the extra mile. That's what I've done. I ended up having like 5 degrees because I felt I needed to just go the extra mile and have more competency in the same subject as somebody else, at least in an objective fashion. So if you have the technical expertise and the knowledge, I think people will listen to you as well.
Just have fun. Whether you or your group, people need to have fun and really feel that's the right thing.
Last question.
Thank you. I have a very specific question, and I'm glad that Punita started the discussion on leadership style. And my question is about to Dipali and Renana. Could you elaborate on what the most effective leadership style is when working with Indian men who work for you? Is it like assertive or collaborative or democratic? What has worked really, really well for you? And you could give us advice.
Sure, I would. A quick one, and I could talk. Yeah. The first thing is, and as Punita added on, be on top of your game. I think it's very important. For me, in textiles, if I had to learn about the warp and the weft, and I had to learn about the machines and the processing, along with what else that can you add? I think that's a very critical thing that you really need to take on. And what is the unique thing about that you can create a difference is very, very important. And definitely you'll be looked up to. And I think, and that's what I think I've done, and that's something is there for everybody else to learn.
I always go back. It's not I suppose my finding too, but women who are working in very difficult conditions, the self-confidence and not being afraid. So there's a tendency to be afraid that, you're not as good as him or he'll put you down, but not to be afraid and to be fully self-confident, and then people fall in line.
That's such a wonderful, wonderful note.
I'll make a controversial comment.
At the very end, at the very, very end, an inspirational one too, I hope. We're going to close.
No, I think I have found that dealing with Indian men working in a work environment is more challenging than working with American men. And so first, I think when you work with Indian men, they want to know about your husband, your father, your family a lot more. They want to connect with them in addition to connecting with you. And so you hope that that connection works. Second, I think you have to be less outspoken when you work with Indian men. They don't really necessarily like outspoken, opinionated women. So you just have to be a little bit more careful.
So this is going to be the controversy on which we end, and I can see that Dipali and Punita are ready to go at it. I'm going to let them go at it in private. If you still want to follow that conversation, you're welcome to do so. But thank you all for coming. Thank the panelists. This was a really wonderful and very insightful and thought-provoking panel.